Everyone pretends they're... Look at the people around you, at your job, at the gym, at that coffee shop, where everyone pretends they're not listening to each other's conversations. Statistically speaking, a growing number of them will never get married. Not because they can't find anyone, not because... Look at the people around you, at your job, at the gym, at that coffee shop, where everyone pretends they're not listening to each other's conversations. Statistically speaking, a growing number of them will never get married. Not because they can't find anyone, not because they're socially awkward, not because something is wrong with them, but because they've made a decision. And that decision is quietly killing one of the oldest human dreams ever sold to us: happily ever after. For thousands of years, marriage wasn't romance, it was survival, a contract, a system, a way to build safety, wealth, children, an entire life, when the world was dangerous and nobody made it alone. But something unprecedented is happening right now. We're watching a shift in the human mind. In the past, being single past a certain age meant failure, a red flag, a tragedy. Today, being single is starting to look like power. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Some people aren't just delaying marriage, they're rejecting it on purpose. They're choosing independence over tradition, autonomy over attachment, peace over partnership. So what changed? Is it dating apps? Is it the economy? Is it trauma, watching their parents destroy each other in divorce court? Or is it something deeper, something biological? Because for some people, marriage doesn't feel like love. It feels like a trap. And the most unsettling part, a lot of them aren't lonely, they're not broken, they're not missing anything. They're simply asking a question modern culture can't answer. What if the one isn't a person, but a life you refuse to shrink? Today, we're going to dissect the psychology of people who choose not to marry and what it reveals about all of us. For most of human history, marriage wasn't a dream. It was infrastructure. It was the system that kept you alive. You didn't marry because you found your soulmate. You married because life was brutal. Food was uncertain, disease was everywhere, and security didn't exist unless you built it with someone else. Marriage meant shared labor, shared protection, shared family ties. In many cultures, it was less about love and more about stability. So when people say marriage is natural, they're not completely wrong. But what they're really describing is this: marriage used to be necessary. And that's the part modern brains can't relate to anymore. Because today, for the first time in history, millions of people can survive alone. You can pay your rent without a spouse. You can build a career without a partner. You can have intimacy without commitment and companionship without a legal contract. Survival is no longer the problem, meaning is. That's the big shift. Marriage has moved from being a survival tool to being a personal identity choice. It's no longer, how do we build a life together? It's, does this life fit who I'm becoming? And once marriage becomes identity instead of survival, it stops being the default. It becomes optional. And when something becomes optional, people finally feel free to ask the question they were never allowed to ask before. Do I actually want this? Or was I just trained to want it? Here's where the conversation gets real. Because not everyone who chooses not to marry is doing it for the same reason. On the surface, it all looks identical. Same lifestyle, same independence, same I'm good on my own. But psychologically, there are two very different kinds of freedom. The first is healthy autonomy. This is the person who genuinely thrives alone. They enjoy their space, their routines, their goals. They're not running from love. They're just not willing to trade their peace for a relationship that doesn't match their values. They can commit. They can attach. They can love deeply. they simply don't confuse marriage with success. Their independence feels calm, grounded, alive. Being single isn't a defense mechanism for them, it's a conscious design choice. But then there's the second kind, avoidant autonomy. This freedom looks strong from the outside, but it's fueled by fear underneath. Not fear of commitment in a childish way, like, I want to sleep around forever. No, this is more sophisticated than that. This is the person whose nervous system associates intimacy with danger. So instead of saying, I'm scared, they say, I'm independent. Instead of saying, I don't trust, they say, I don't need anyone. And here's the tell. Healthy autonomy creates expansion. Avoidant autonomy creates control. Because the avoidant person isn't choosing solitude for growth. They're choosing it to prevent loss. They're not avoiding marriage because it's limiting. They're avoiding marriage because it's vulnerable. And you can usually spot the difference by one simple question. When love gets close, when someone wants to merge lives, make plans, and build a future, do you feel peace, or do you feel that quiet rising pressure in your chest that says, I'm about to lose myself? That's the split. One type of freedom is power. The other is armor. And if we don't understand the difference, we'll keep romanticizing independence without noticing when it's actually just a beautifully packaged survival strategy. So why does being single feel so good for some people? Not fine, not I'm coping. I mean genuinely good. Like they're more alive, more focused, more themselves. The answer sits inside your brain's reward system. For centuries, humans were wired to chase oxytocin, the bonding hormone. It's released through closeness, touch, trust, attachment. Oxytocin is your brain's way of saying, this person is safe. Stay here. In a dangerous world, that mattered. Pair bonding wasn't just romantic, it was survival. Bonding meant protection, stability, community, children. So our brains learned to reward it. But then the world changed. Today, you don't need a partner to survive. You need a paycheck, a phone, a skill set, a plan. And for many modern adults, the reward system has quietly shifted. Instead of being driven primarily by oxytocin, bonding and merging, some people are driven more by dopamine. Dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical, it's the pursuit chemical. It fires when you have novelty, progress, momentum, control. And look at what single life offers. Total autonomy, new experiences, no compromises, no negotiations, no emotional maintenance meetings at 11:47 p.m. because someone felt a vibe shift. You choose your schedule, your goals, your silence. For a dopamine-driven brain, that feels like oxygen. And here's the twist. When your brain associates autonomy with reward, commitment starts to feel like loss. Not because love is bad, but because your nervous system is trained to see freedom as safety. So for some people, staying single isn't a failure to bond. It's a different bond entirely, a bond with independence, with growth, with self-direction. And once your brain learns that, it becomes very hard to unlearn. Now let's talk about the reason nobody wants to say out loud. Because for a massive number of people, especially millennials and older Gen Z, this isn't just about freedom. It's about fear. Not the dramatic kind. Not, I'm scared of commitment, like a cliche. I'm talking about the kind of fear your brain learns in childhood without anyone ever teaching it. If you grew up in the late 80s, 90s, or early 2000s, there's a good chance you were raised in what psychologists could call generation divorce. You didn't just hear about divorce, you lived in its aftershock. You watched love turn into courtroom paperwork. You watched quiet resentment build into screaming fights. You watched the adults who promised forever suddenly act like enemies, and worst of all, you watched the home, the one place that's supposed to feel safe, become unstable. You watched the home, the one place that's supposed to feel safe, become unstable. That experience doesn't just hurt emotionally, it programs your nervous system. Psychologists call it vicarious trauma. When witnessing someone else's pain, trains your brain to anticipate the same outcome for you. So even if nobody ever said it directly, your brain absorbed a message. Marriage isn't safety. Marriage is risk. And once that association is wired in, it becomes automatic. As an adult, you might want love. You might crave intimacy. You might even meet someone amazing, but the moment the relationship starts heading toward permanence, something in you tenses. A subtle panic, a cold calculation, a voice that whispers, "Don't build your whole life around another person, because when it ends, it will destroy you." This is where gamophobia comes in, the deep fear of marriage. But it's bigger than fear. It becomes a survival strategy. Because if marriage looks like a bomb you saw explode in your parents' lives, then staying single doesn't feel lonely. It feels smart. It feels safe. And that's the tragedy. Some people aren't rejecting marriage because they don't believe in love. They're rejecting marriage because they've already seen what love can turn into. This is where a lot of people get misunderstood, because society loves to label them emotionally unavailable, cold, selfish, commitment phobic. But what if the truth is darker and softer at the same time? What if they're not cold? What if they're overloaded? People with a dismissive avoidant attachment style don't avoid love because they don't feel. They avoid love because their nervous system treats intimacy like a flood. They can handle connection in small doses, dates, chemistry, laughter, even deep conversations at 2 a.m. But the moment a relationship starts turning into a life, the moment someone says, "Where is this going?" or "I want a future with you," or "Let's move in," their body reacts before their mind does. Tight chest, restless sleep, irritation, the sudden urge to pull back. And it's not because they're playing games, it's because closeness triggers a subconscious alarm. Danger, dependence, loss of control, future pain. So they do what they learned to do early in life. They create distance. Sometimes that looks like disappearing right when things get serious. Sometimes it looks like finding tiny flaws in a good partner, because perfection isn't the point. Escape is. And here's the heartbreaking part. Avoidant protectors often want love. They just don't trust what love costs. Their independence isn't always confidence. Sometimes it's armor. Because if you never fully attach, you never fully lose. And if you never fully lose, you never have to relive the kind of pain your brain vowed would never happen again. Now let's zoom out from childhood trauma and brain chemistry and look at the modern battlefield, your phone. Because even for people who want love, dating today doesn't feel like romance. It feels like shopping. Dating apps didn't just change how we meet, they changed how we think. Barry Schwartz called it the paradox of choice. The more options you have, the less satisfied you become. Because every choice creates a haunting question. What if there was someone better? In the past, love had boundaries. You met people through school, work, friends, your neighborhood. Your world was small. You had a handful of real options. And when you chose someone, you built something. Today, you have thousands of options in your pocket. And your brain reacts to that like a gambler in Vegas. Swipe, match, dopamine. Swipe, match, dopamine. You're not just meeting people. You're getting micro hits of reward for possibility. And that rewires commitment. Because commitment requires something the swipe culture destroys. Tolerance for imperfection. Apps train you to become a maximizer. A maximizer doesn't look for connection. They look for the best deal. So instead of entering relationships with curiosity, people enter with audits. Is their job impressive enough? Are they attractive enough? Do they text fast enough? Do they have one annoying habit I can't tolerate forever? And when the options feel infinite, any flaw becomes a reason to keep searching. That's how the perfect match trap forms. You don't reject people because they're bad. You reject them because they're not mathematically optimal. So the forever single person often isn't rejecting love. They're trapped in evaluation mode, constantly scanning for the missing 10%, convinced 100% is one swipe away. But here's the truth nobody wants to admit. When love becomes a marketplace, people stop being human. They become listings, and commitment starts to feel like you're closing the browser, while the internet still has millions of tabs open.
Dove Beauty Bar with Nutrient Serum. Infused with 1/4 moisturizing cream, it goes deep inside your skin to keep it nourished for up to 20
browser, while the internet still has millions of tabs open. And then we reach the strangest trend of all, not just staying single, not just choosing independence, but literally marrying yourself. It's called sologamy, people holding full wedding ceremonies, wearing white, exchanging rings, and making vows to themselves. At first glance it sounds ridiculous, like peak narcissism, but psychologically it's doing something very specific. It's rewriting an old script. For centuries, culture told us, you are incomplete until someone chooses you. Sologamy flips that message and declares, I am already whole. And for some people, that can be genuinely healing. It's a ritual of self-reclamation, an identity ceremony, a way of saying, I'm not waiting for permission to be worthy. But here's the part no one talks about. Not all self-partnering is self-love. Sometimes it's self-defense. Because I don't need anyone can be empowerment, or it can be a scar speaking. It can mean I'm complete, or it can secretly mean I can't risk being abandoned again. So sologamy isn't the punchline, it's the symptom, a loud cultural signal that the stigma of being single is dying, and being chosen by yourself is becoming a new kind of status. Not pathetic, not sad, almost revolutionary. Now, let's dismantle the biggest myth in this entire conversation, that people who don't marry are automatically lonely. Because loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness is a wound. It's that aching sense of disconnection, being unseen, unsupported, emotionally starving. But solitude can be a luxury. It's being alone without feeling abandoned. It's choosing your own company and actually enjoying it. It's space to think, create, heal, and become someone you're proud to live with. And research has shown that many single people aren't isolated at all. They often maintain stronger friendships, deeper community ties, and wider social networks, while some married couples slowly shrink their world down to just each other. So no, being single doesn't automatically mean you're alone. But here's what's also true, and this is where we have to be honest. There is a hidden cost to staying single for too long. Not because marriage is superior, but because intimacy is a muscle. If you spend years optimizing your life around complete independence, your nervous system can start adapting to one rule. No one gets close enough to disrupt my peace. And that's when freedom quietly becomes rigidity. You become less patient with conflict, less tolerant of compromise, less practiced at repair, the ability to rupture and reconnect. So the real question isn't, are you single or married? The real question is, are you choosing solitude as growth, or are you choosing it as avoidance? Because solitude can be medicine, but it can also become a beautiful silent cage if you don't notice when the door stopped being open. So what do we do with all of this? Because choosing not to marry isn't automatically healthy, and it isn't automatically broken either. It depends on why. Here's a simple healing protocol. 3 questions that tell you everything. 1. When love gets close, do you feel peace or pressure? If intimacy feels like home, that's autonomy. If it feels like suffocation, that's armor. 2. Are you protecting your freedom or protecting a wound? One is growth, the other is fear wearing a crown. 3. If the right person appeared truly safe, Truly aligned, would you still reject commitment? If the answer is yes with clarity, that's choice. If the answer is yes with panic, that's trauma. And here's the bigger truth. The future of love is not one size fits all. For some people, marriage still makes sense. For others, the healthiest relationship might be long-term partnership without a contract, living apart together, being child-free, building a chosen family. The goal isn't to follow tradition. The goal is to build a life that doesn't betray your nervous system. Now, I want to hear from you. Is marriage outdated or still the ultimate goal? Drop your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the human mind, hit subscribe because this channel is just getting started. Thank you for watching.